All right, so let's talk about central Pontine Myelinosis. We're gonna fight at the end of this. We're just gonna like fist fight each other at the end of this. So anyway, so central Pontine Myelinosis. What's the common belief that what is central Pontine Myelinosis? Okay, we get the patient, we correct the sodium so fast that the rise in sodium in the serum result in movement of the water from the pons, from the myelin sheath of the nerves in the pons, and that result in drying out of those myelin sheaths, and then they die. And when that happens, the patient develops locked-in syndrome, because all of those fibers and everything that's going down to the arms and legs and everything, it stops working. So basically, locked-in syndrome. That's one of the worst thing you don't wish it on your enemies, right? You can only blink. That's all. That's the only thing you can do, and you do that for the rest of your life. It's worse than death. It's really very scary. So we don't want to have locked-in syndrome. Okay. But what do I believe? Believe just so I'll start with it, and then you can, and then I'll explain why. What I believe is that central Pontine Myelinosis does exist. It does exist. They already did the case report. We already have patients that develop central Pontine Myelinosis. But I don't think it's related to the sodium. I think it's related to something else. And if it's related to the sodium, I don't think it's related to the rapidity of correction of the sodium. And even if it's related to that, I don't think it's related to that alone. So it's not what they're saying that it's only the sodium causing that, right? I'm just going to explain why. Number one, when we had this, initially when I was young, they said central Pontine Myelinosis. Of course, there's no randomized controlled trials, there's no big trials, there's nothing. There's only case reports. And they said you have to correct the sodium by a factor of 12 milliequivalent per day. And which basically made it easy for us, like half a milliequivalent per hour, 2 milliequivalent every 4 hours that we do, perfect. And then they said, a couple of years later, they said, came out and said, the recommendations changed to 10 milliequivalent per day. And then the recommendations changed to 8. And then the recommendation now is actually 4 to 6. The recommendations now, guys, it's 4 to 6 milliequivalent per day. That means if I take a patient with hyponatremia at a level of 100, I probably spend the whole week, or maybe more than a week actually, trying to get this patient down to up to a normal value. So why do you think they keep changing the recommendation? Because when they said 12, and we got stuck to the 12, we stuck to the 12, people still developed it at the level of 12. So then they said, okay, well, maybe 10. So we stuck to 10, and people, of course, you can go a lot, some people are not sticking to 10 and by mistake, but they saw that some people developed it still when they're at 9. So they said, okay, we're gonna change it to 8, and then they change it to 6. So the level keeps on going down because what they recommended did not do the job. So the job that we need to see, which is protection of the patient from central Pontine Myelinosis, didn't happen when we followed these guidelines. That's number one. Number two, there is not a single case of central Pontine Myelinosis that was reported with a patient that had a starting sodium of more than 125. So if your sodium 126 and you showed up and I took your sodium and corrected it by 10 in 1 hour, you are not going to develop central Pontine Myelinosis. How? If the mechanism is the same, which is basically raising the sodium and the water just goes out from the ponds, how is that possible? Right? It's not possible. Right? If that's the chemical reaction that's going to happen, it's going to happen. Or the physiological reaction is going to happen, it's going to happen. So that's number two. Number three, the same people who told us that you can't correct more than 4 or 4 to 6 milliequivalent per day, they also said that if your sodium is less than 110 or the patient is seizing, you are allowed to give 3% saline and actually correct by a factor of 2 milliequivalent per hour for whatever hours until the patient stops seizing. How? So if 4 a day or 6 a day can cause this problem, why 2 an hour cannot cause this problem? It doesn't make any sense. Number 4, in the neuro ICU, they proved this wrong. Neuro ICU is usually more advanced than other ICU for some reason in discovering things. So in the neuro ICU, did they care about the central Pontine myelinosis? They didn't care about the central Pontine myelinosis. What they do is that they say, they get a patient who's having increased intracranial pressure, and they take it from 140 sodium. They give him 3% saline. They raise that to 160 in 2 hours if they can. Or take the patient even if he's having sodium 130 or 125 or whatever, and just raise it as fast as they can to 160 to decrease the intracranial tension. And there's no cases of central Pontine myelinosis that come from the neuro ICU. Right? That doesn't make any sense either. And then the practice of number 5 or whatever, I forgot, number 5 I think, the practice of giving the DDAVP or water or D5 water to move the sodium back and stuff like that, for me it doesn't make any sense. I just want to ask something. What do you think, how long it takes for when the sodium rises outside the serum and the water moves out? How do you think that, how long do you think this reaction or this movement takes? Like, is it seconds or minutes? I'm talking seconds or minutes. I don't think it takes hours or days. So if you already did the guy already went higher than what you're trying to do, and then at the same time, this movement happened already, and the lab now reflected 2 hours or 3 hours later. The lab now came back and said, "You screwed up." So now I'm gonna take the D5 or the DDAV, give it to the patient, and then put him back where he was before, only to raise him back again, and maybe the same thing will happen again, and rise so fast, and then come back again and rise so fast. So basically it becomes a self-fulfilling hypothesis. If you keep doing like this, you will have Pontine myelinosis for whatever reason, because you keep on going back and forth, subjecting the patient to the same problem. Moreover, I want to ask a question. Why the PONS only? Why not? This is a generalized thing. It's not like, it's not a local phenomenon. It's supposed to be, all the neurons that has myelin that has this reaction, but for some reason it's only the PONS. And then the other, I think number 7 or whatever, I think it's the funniest one. Somebody finds his, father after he left him for a month in the house by himself. He doesn't eat or drink. He's debilitated. He's old. He say, "Dad, come with me. I'm a good son. I'll take you to the open buffet, the Chinese open buffet." He goes there just with one meal. He's raising his sodium probably from 120 all the way to 130 in one meal. We never had a central Pontine myelinosis. I'm not aware of any case of central Pontine myelinosis recorded from outpatient. So it only happens when the doctors touch the patient and try to correct the sodium. It never happens from an outpatient. Somebody goes and eats sodium or something and develops central Pontine. It doesn't happen. So I think, in my opinion, the central Pontine myelinosis, as I said, it doesn't happen from the sodium correction itself. I think it's probably the time. If you look at the cases, most of them are alcoholics that develop this central Pontine myelinosis, but some of them are not, obviously, so we still need to look. It could be the sodium and something else. It could be just the fact that the sodium is low by itself is causing a problem. I don't know, but all I know is that the correction of up to 6 or up to 4 or up to all of these things, it really doesn't make any sense. Having said that, in real practice, because we're dealing with patients' lives, I'm not gonna go crazy and say I'm not gonna watch the sodium being corrected. I'm just sticking still to the 12. You know, just reasonable, something. I think it's reasonable, something in the middle. You correct a little bit on the faster side, and I have never seen one case. I've dealt with so many cases of that. I've never seen one single case. So I think it's reasonable to stick to the 12. If anybody has another opinion, it would be nice to put it in for history.
So I think that the argument that I've heard about why correction from, like, say somebody is actively seizing, right? For one, there's a risk-benefit argument of like, look, even if rapid correction does incur a risk of ODS, that is rare, even in cases where people do overcorrect, and there are concrete risks to ongoing seizure. And so, like, excuse me, even if there is a definite percentage risk, it may just be outweighed by, like, look, letting them continue seize and have airway compromise and the rest is worse, so we should just fix that. The other argument, argument that I've heard is that essentially it's the 24-hour total correction is what imposes the risk, not the correction over the course of hours. I see your point about equilibration of tonicity probably happens more quickly than that, but there's plenty of things in medicine where we're concerned about sort of the duration of exposure to some stimulus, right? The duration of ischemia matters, the duration of bacteremia matters, whatever. And so it's at least plausible to me. I can't articulate a deep mechanism, but I can't articulate a mechanism for any of this.
None of us.
And I don't know that anybody can.
Yeah.
So it's plausible that, like, rapid correction over 2 hours in somebody who's seizing, of like, we take them from 112 to 118 and then we hold them there with a DDAVP clamp and just keep them at 118 for 24 hours and then take another step the next day. It's plausible that that could have some physiologic effect that we don't understand. I don't have enough specific clinical experience of the DDAVP clamp to know if it has that risk of sort of wild swings one direction or the other. The way that I've seen that described sort of, I think, most effectively is that basically you're trying to make as few movements as possible. You give hypertonic to correct by a predictable amount, and then you monitor and just hold there, rather than using a bolus. And there was a recent paper that was suggesting that basically hypertonic bolus correction was more predictable, had less overcorrection than hypertonic drips. So I think that's changes a little bit how predictable that strategy might be.
Hypertonic bolus have more predictable.
Because you're giving a defined amount of hypertonic saline.
What about the drip? You are giving a defined amount.
It's easier to forget about it.
No.
Just leave it running.
Well, we monitor every 3 hours sodium anyway. But I agree with everything you said except that last hypertonic saline. I know probably somebody did a study or something, but it just doesn't make any sense. Everybody in neuro ICU and here we got so what do you call it? So experienced in hypertonic saline that we know exactly how to titrate it. I mean, we're really we do it so many times now, and we use it a lot for patients with anoxic brain injury for very weak evidence really, and we use it to raise and if you work in a neuro ICU, they're just like experts in hypertonic saline and how to do it with a drip. So boluses. So forget about the bolus. So when we were talking, the first reason that actually kind of debunk a little bit this 24-hour thing, because yes, they are publishing 24-hour, but there's no evidence behind it. Nobody ever did a study or demonstrated that the 24-hour is what injures the patient. Is not like the rapid corrections or anything like that per hours. But also there's no explanation of why their limit keeps on going down. So as we're practicing medicine just in the last 15 years, it went from 12 all the way to 6 or 4 to 6 now. Somebody need to explain to us why. I mean, I know because cases kept on happening below the limit. I don't know if a case happened now below 4. What they gonna do? I hope a case, but I don't hope anybody bad. But if one case happened below 4, some scientist or doctor or whatever who's doing the research is gonna say, let's pause here and just do a study. And I don't know if IRB approval will be, but IRB approval could be easily attainable if you do correct at 4 per 24 hours, correct at 6 per 24 hours, correct at 10, 8, 10, 12, maybe up to 16. I think IRB will say, maybe okay, because there are some cases that corrected so fast and nothing happened to them. And we can even categorize those patients based on 2 categories. We can say patients above 125, and there's no, as I said before, it doesn't make any sense if the same reaction happened, even 24 hours. If we talk about 24 hours, we correct those patients in 24 hours much faster than 6 and 4 and 8 and all of these things.
Yeah, I don't know what your practice is. My practice is essentially to ignore hyponatremia above 125.
Yeah.
Because correction is going to put you back into a totally normal range, and I'm just not worried about fluctuations
No,
in the
but
normal range.
I'm not talking about, we don't admit those patients for hyponatremia. What I'm saying is that you give him normal saline because he's in septic shock, 125, next morning, 12 hours later, it's 145. Have you seen that? We've seen it a million times. And then what happened? Nothing. So I don't get it. It's something is really, right, Professor?
You have to
Is-
assume
basically-
non-linearity to the reaction.
Yeah.
Or to the risk.
Yes.
Because what you've said about going from 140 to 160,
Nothing
like you
happens.
said, we do
Yeah.
that and we don't get worried about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're done. Thank you.
My pot.
Yeah.
Oh.